north of Riker Yard, in between Punxsutawney and Du Bois, the Clearfield Branch headed out towards the east, and I've modeled that to incorporate really just a quick run from a train originating on the Clearfield Branch coming into Riker Yard and exchanging cars and then heading back up the branch. I really don't know if that's how that occurred. There was a Y at C&M Junction, which is where the Clearfield Branch departed from the main line. I wasn't able to model the Y, so I just modeled it as a single spur that runs behind the backdrop, and will at some point have a pagoda style interlocking tower. But even if it's not completely prototypically accurate, it certainly adds a little bit of activity in addition to the other work that takes place at Riker Yard. So also, if you recall, if you've watched other videos, Riker Yard is a main line and basically 5 tracks. The first 2 tracks are arrival departure tracks and are double-ended. Again, naturally, ideally you'd have a double-ended yard for most of the tracks. So since we don't have a double-ended yard, what I need to typically do is, as I build a train, set a caboose, a northbound train, caboose gets set on one of the arrival departure tracks first, and then we'll build the train on top of it. And yes, the Santa Fe style caboose, not accurate. Not sure if B&O ever used any like that, but they certainly, I've never seen any on any of the books I have on the Buffalo, Rochester, and Pittsburgh branch, which is the portion I model. So they will all get replaced by bay window cabooses of various types. Even these, by 1974, probably didn't have yellow ends anymore. And again, since I designed Riker Yard both under pretty severe space constraints, and because I really didn't know what I was doing at the time, so there's really only 3 classification tracks if you maintain the first 2 tracks as arrival departure tracks. And the good news is I have more destinations than 3. The bad news is that means I really don't have a track dedicated for each destination to set cars out, so I really need to double each track to serve for 2 destinations. So I've really, which is nice that you've got 6 destinations but only 3 tracks. So ideally the Clearfield cars would all be on their own track, but unfortunately I have to also store cars that are heading to Bessemer and Lake Erie in the interchange down in Butler. So we'll pull this whole string out, and I think for Clearfield we're going to need all of them except 2. And I had the conductor walk the train earlier, and I think we know which 2 those are. And of course they're somewhat in the middle of the cut of cars, so we'll pull the whole string out, start shoving cars against the caboose to build the train. Yeah, this flat car with crates on it, that's one of the 2 we don't need per the switch list. And then there's this 40-foot C&O box car that we also don't need right there. Southbound trains just get built the opposite way, where you build the train first and then tack a caboose on the end, which is more prototypical, but again, not being able to really work the yard from both sides, that's really not an option. just get this Erie Lackawanna gondola clear of the fouling point so we can shove this boxcar back up the yard ladder. Apparently there's a whole bunch of empty gondolas going up the Clearfield branch, and typically they would get loaded, or they will get loaded with raw timber that will head ultimately to the creosote plant in Falls Creek. Not very typical that we have that many cars headed up there at once, so might get kind of congested in an operating session or two up at Falls Creek. Alright, so we'll shove this box car up the ladder, then we'll dig out that flat car, and then we'll have our train ready. Naturally, if I had more than one operator, the Clearfield branch could come into the yard in the midst of this, but I'll do it sequentially since it seems that I just have one operator today. Again, just clear the fouling point. Yeah, for a while I had to limit my trains coming out of Clearfield to 8 cars because I just didn't have enough motive power to handle more than that, because there's a grade coming out of Du Bois, actually down from Du Bois to Riker, and then the Clearfield branch is also on a grade back in staging. But fortunately the staging track is long enough to easily take a 12-car train with 2 locomotives. Now that I've built the one of the F7s, I have a little bit of extra power to be able to do this. And we'll set this Seaboard Coastline box just past the fouling point, and then shove the flat car that we don't need up the yard ladder as well. So those 2 cars, as I mentioned, destined for the Bessemer and Lake Erie interchange in Butler. I won't shove these all the way back onto track 5 yet, the flat car and the box car, so I can finish assembling the train, and I'll shove the entire train clear of the crossovers so that were the Clearfield branch train to come in a little earlier, it's got clear access to the arrival departure track number 2, which is now unoccupied. But right now I'm with the switch operations, I'm tying up the arrival departure crossovers. So we'll just set these here for now. And once I got the train assembled, the switch crew can come back in and shove these 2 cars all the way back into track 5. If I recall correctly, the Clearfield train coming into Punxsutawney has 11 cars, so didn't quite max out the switch list or maximum train length on the way in, but the outbound train, as I mentioned, I think is 12 cars long, but we'll check it against the switch list before we head out of town here. And this time I'll shove these all the way back so that we're clear of the second crossover here to make room for the Clearfield train to come in, and it'll just pull all the way in onto arrival departure track number 2. And then the yard crew can pull the train, grab it by the caboose, pull that up onto the yard lead, and that'll free up the power of the Clearfield transfer train to just move over and grab onto the front of this Western Maryland gondola, and shortly thereafter be able to head out of town back up the Clearfield branch. So now that we're ready for the Clearfield branch train to come in, Now the yard crew can head back up the ladder and tidy up their yard by putting the two cars that are on the ladder back into track 5. And you'll note if we walk down that the yard here in Riker just about fits the 12-car train and the caboose. It's definitely more important to have your staging yards have full capacity for the maximum train length you want to run. If your yards don't quite have the capacity, it wasn't totally uncommon for trains to double the yard. If you run out of space somewhere, definitely you want to run out of space in your active yards, and that creates a little bit of extra operating interest if somebody has to double the yard. Don't have double-ended tracks everywhere. At least if you've got 2 arrival departure tracks that are double-ended, you can set off cars or double the yard at either end. Alright, so our train for Clearfield is now made up. The yard crew is done with their work to prepare for that. They've got the Clearfield bound train set up. So we'll just have them pull clear of the first switch on the ladder, and they'll be ready for the Clearfield train. So we can set our both sets of crossovers into arrival departure track number 2 and prepare for the Clearfield train. Alright, turn the headlight off of 6507. We will acquire 4569 since the crew will get in that as their lead locomotive. And turn the headlight on. Allowing that turn out. And run back to the other end of the yard. Perform a brake test. Now we can come in with the yard crew and pull the inbound train off of the arrival departure tracks. Guess I indicated I was going to do that first, but we ended up running around the train on the main instead of doing it this way. Again, the complexity of trying to do everything by yourself. While they get that train connected, we'll take a look at our switch list. So you can see that almost all of the cars here, we got 2 for Butler, whole bunch for Falls Creek, a couple for Du Bois, a few more for Falls Creek, one for Clarion Junction, and one for Clearfield Yard. And actually, track number 4 is Falls Creek and Du Bois, so it looks like maybe all but 2 of these, yeah, all but 2 of these are going to wind up on track number 4, and then Clo and Clarion are both on track 3. So not going to be a very complicated series of yard maneuvers here for the crew, but hey, sometimes you get lucky and have an easy day. So we'll pull this whole cut all the way out onto the yard lead, which is actually the second main running north out of Riker. And actually, per the 1974 employee timetable, it indicates that the main number 2 was under the direction of the yard master at Riker. So apparently they actually did use the second main as their yard lead. Which makes sense because it was single track main coming all the way up from Butler. So I guess they just didn't start using the second main as a second main until some distance north of Riker Yard. In my case, it's exactly one track's, the longest track in the yard. Here's the crossovers at C&M Junction. Again, significantly compressed. But this switch stand here is essentially the equivalent distance to the longest track in Riker Yard. So I can pull a whole cut onto the yard lead. So we'll see. So we've got Erie Lackawanna 30824, and that goes to Clearfield Yard. So that is going to end up going down the Indiana branch to get loaded with coal. Per the research I did, a lot of the Indiana branch coal ended up heading up the Clearfield branch to go to New York State Gas and Electric generation facility. So it's interesting, there's a lot of coal, obviously that B&O moved, and it all went in different directions depending on the quality and grade of coal and who the customer was. So you can actually see coal trains moving opposite directions, sometimes full, sometimes empty. It's quite a variety. I had to pause there for a minute because I couldn't find my uncoupling pick. Alright, so that takes care of copper car for Clo. These, as I mentioned, virtually everything except that hopper car and one other car are going into track number 4. But we're going to run into a problem here. In that track number 4 is loaded with empty coal cars, so we'll have to, you can see that track is not going to take everything that we need to shove into it. So I'm going to need to pull all these primarily empty coal cars out and stick them on a different track. So I should have done that first. Sometimes it doesn't work out like you planned. So we did one move, and then we're going to shove this whole cut back onto the arrival departure track. Since we seem to have a ton of track space on 5, I think I'm just going to move those coal cars over to 5. Because we only have those 2 that we had set back there for Bessemer and Lake Erie. So we'll stack the coal cars on top of those. So here again, the issue of having a yard that when I was designing the railroad, I really don't know if I could have done anything about it anyway, because I just don't have any more room. To have made the yard wider, because it's a double-deck railroad, you really would have started losing access to even view the lower decks. So while it's not ideal, it is, I'm not sure it could have been avoided. But yeah, you definitely want to have, if you can, you definitely want to have one track for every destination conceivable out of whatever yard you're working out of. So if it's a small yard that only sends cars to 1 or 2 places, you can have 1 or 2 tracks. But since Riker was a main classification and division point on the Pennsylvania division, what was formerly the Buffalo division. Chassis system combined two divisions in '73. But since it was a division point, I've got, like I said, at least 6 destinations, plus some of the other coal traffic that I didn't even include in that. So causes a lot of extra maneuvers, which isn't the worst thing, but again, when you're working, if you end up doing operations on a fast clock, that just tortures your yard crew, because switching is not easily accommodated by a fast clock. So certainly having extra switch maneuvers in your yard causes even that worsens that situation. So ideally, you want to have 1 track per destination, which saves you a significant amount of switching moves. All right. Like I said, we'll pull these hoppers out of here and kick them over a track. Seeing as that most of our inbound train from Clearfield is got to go to Du Bois and Falls Creek, and that's track 4 traffic. These 2 covered hoppers are likely going to Falls Creek and will work their way onto the Penn Central and into Ohio to be loaded with plastic pellets. I'm not even sure we'll have enough room on track 4 for everything once we move these covered hopper or these coal cars, but we will see. If not, we may have to leave a few on the arrival departure tracks. The Du Bois local should be arriving at some point before too long, so it's going to take, that's maxed out at 8 cars, so it's obviously going to have to leave some of the traffic for Du Bois and Falls Creek here till the following day, but it'll do a good job trying to clear out most of the yard, because I think my recollection is it's only bringing in 3 or 4 cars, so it'll be at least a net reduction of 3 or 4 cars. Alright, since these are going back on track 4, we'll just run all the way back to the arrival departure track and tack these onto the cut that all but 1 car is going into that track anyway, so we'll have to identify what that car is. If you look at the switch list real quick here. It is a boxcar, B&O boxcar 469074. Alright, let's try this again. Pull everything off the arrival departure track. Find our 1 B&O boxcar that needs to go on track 3. Everything else is going to be track 4. Looks like we've got 2 B&O cars to choose from, and it is the first one here, so right behind the Lehigh New England car. So we got a cut to shove onto the track 4 first, then we can pop that one over to track 3. There's a different one, 469007. This is a whole batch of, I think, 11 AccuRail cars I did with their interesting and I think pretty effective renumbering decal system, especially for someone like me who's really interested in operations. You know, I like detailed rolling stock, but I'm not putting cut levers on every single car. I'll do a few just for the sake of trying it out and enjoying the building process, but when you need unique road numbers to support operations, the AccuRail system's pretty slick. Shove this first group of cars onto track 4. We'll find out pretty quickly here if we have enough space for this pretty significant traffic headed to Falls Creek and Du Bois. Okay, it's not that one. It's going to be the next one. Next B&O car that we need. Coming up here after the Lehigh, New England. Shove that just past the fouling point. Also talking about doing yard work with a fast clock. Another big benefit to that is having a double-ended yard with yard leads on both ends, because then you can actually operate 2 switch crews in the same yard. So that is, at least the best I can estimate, that's probably the ideal situation. If you've got a classification track for every dedicated to every single destination, and you've got a double-ended yard so you can work it with 2 crews, that is probably your best shot at being able to keep up with maybe a 3-to-1 fast clock, so that the road crews have a sense of distance and time because of the fast clock, but the yard crews don't get buried as a result. Obviously that would be, as I mentioned, for a busy yard, some yard that's mostly there to serve the local switching operations. That would probably just get done by that local crew anyway, so that takes some of that out of the equation. But for a busy yard like Riker, would have been better if I could have gotten 2 crews and double-sided tracks, or double-ended tracks. Alright, so everything else here goes into track 4 if it fits. We'll see. I think we will. It's looking like we'll be alright. Here's these 2 Pennsylvania cars that were already on that track that we pulled to get the coal cars out. So now they're back where they belong on track 4. Yeah, we got about 2 more car lengths, and we only need about 1.5, so just fits. So now we'll run this caboose and stick it on the caboose track. The yard crew will be done. Alright, that concludes our brief little operating session to show the intent of the Clearfield branch, which is really just really a transfer run, I guess, from the Clearfield branch into Riker and then back out. So only, as I said, a handful of feet coming around the bend here, and right into staging behind the backdrop. So that is not a very long run, but just creates another destination for traffic in and out of Riker.